Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone. So in this video we're going to be continuing our read-along of the Secret Zoo Raids and Rescues. And last time we finished off, we completed Chapter 30, so we'll be starting today with Chapter 31. As always guys, I hope all is going well, and I hope you enjoy the read today. Chapter 31, Richie rises to the occasion. Richie was Lily's only hope. The idea made Richie sick, but it also forced him to act. He needed to get the Rhino away from the waiting pool so he could safely pull Lily out. But how? He glanced around the exhibit. The fake mountainside, the caves, the wall of steel bars. What could he do? Thinking of his nerd gear, he reached into his pocket. His finger closed on a pencil, a highlighter, a ruler, a penlight. He went back to the penlight and pulled it out. Like the rest of Richie's belongings, it was invisible, but his thumb easily found the button to turn it on, and when a tiny beam of light sliced through the darkness, the Rhino looked up. A grunt snorted and took a few steps toward the near end of the pool, its stare locked on the light. Richie's heart was hammering in his chest. His gaze moved from the Rhino to Lily. Then he cocked his arm and hurled the penlight, which turned as it sailed through the air, its steady light streaking across the rocky-looking walls and grassy floor. It clinked against a concrete boulder and came to a rest on the ground. The Rhino grunted and charged around the pool, its footfalls shaking the exhibit. Richie focused on the water and the wavering image of Lily. Then he realized he was running when he felt the ground moving beneath him. At the edge of the pool, he dove head first, mindful not to go deep. He felt Lily, wrapped his arms under her torso, and brought her to the surface. Then he waded across the pool and dragged her onto the shore. "Lily!" he whispered urgently. "Get up! Wake up!" Her eyes were closed, but she seemed to be breathing. From the corner of his eyes, Richie saw his penlight go out. He glanced up and realized the Rhino had crushed it. Now the powerful animal was looking his way, and Richie realized Lily wasn't the only one who had her chameleon stripped off. The Rhino took a slow step, and then another. Richie glanced over his shoulder. Just a few feet away was the wall of steel bars that protected visitors. He saw that part of it was sectioned off into a door. He remembered Lily's magic key and unclipped it from her hip. Then he jumped to his feet and ran toward the back of the exhibit. Maybe he could open the door and lead the Rhino through it. Maybe lock the animal outside. He stopped at the bars, and as he fumbled with the key, the Rhino's footfalls grew louder and louder. Richie didn't dare look back. His hands steadied and the magic key slipped into the slot. He turned his wrist and heard the lock pop. With only seconds to get out of the way, he pushed through the door and dove out into the visitor area, over to one side. The charging Rhino barreled through the doorway right behind him, and the entire building shook as it hurtled through. Dazed, Richie forced himself to stand. The visitor area was perhaps 200 feet long and 20 feet across. One wall consisted of the cage bars, the other was colorful brick. When he grabbed the steel door, trying to swing it shut and lock the angry Rhino out of the rage where Lily still lay, it didn't budge. And he realized it wasn't dangling at an angle, its top hinge broken and its bottom jammed against the ground. The Rhino snorted and swung around, and Richie took off running into the visitor area to keep the Rhino's attention away from the helpless Lily. He ran past marble benches and tall ficus trees and weighty ceramic pots. The floor began to rumble, and he realized the Rhino was bearing down on him again. As Richie dove off to one side, the animal charged past before coming to a quick halt. He moved to one side of the bench, putting it between him and the Rhino, which paced forward, tiles cracking beneath its heaving hooves. A second later, it charged again. Richie jumped aside as its snout flung the bench into the air, where it spun and crashed into the steel bars. The Rhino turned and trampled a ficus tree, dirt splitting out and ceramic pieces clinking against the tiles. Richie ran, uncertain about everything. A door stood in the wall of the visitor area. but it was surely kept locked. And even if it wasn't, he couldn't lead the Rhino outside. As the ground began to tremble again, Richie lost his balance and fell. Chapter 32. The Biz with Blizz. Megan stood frozen, watching the guard. The walkie-talkie hovered inches from his face. As his lips curled to form his first word, the black box shot out of his hand, struck the floor, and dropped its battery pack. The guard glanced at the suddenly distant walkie-talkie, then his hand. Before he could react, his head rocked to one side and he toppled over, banging against a wall of steel bars. He slipped to the ground and lay there in a knot of twisted limbs, unconscious. Megan stared, dumbfounded. A girl's voice from beside the fallen guard. "Don't just stand there! Get your bear!" Megan realized what had happened. Sara. She slipped down the hall undetected and leveled the person who was about to radio in what he saw. The guard's legs suddenly sprang feet first into the air. His body turned like a snake's. Then he began to slide down the floor toward Megan, Sara dragging him by his ankles. "Come on!" Sara ordered. "Get Blizzard out so I can lock up this clown!" The gate squealed as Megan shoveled it all the way open. Blizzard stood and nearly slipped on the straw-covered floor. Snarling, she took a nervous step to one side. His head hung low. "Blizzard," Megan said. "It's me." The powerful polar bear let out a slow growl. His gaze was fixed on something toward the front of his cage, and Megan looked over her shoulder. She realized what was wrong. It appeared that the guard was somehow sliding down the hall on his back. Megan quickly opened one portal to send her chameleons back, but the noise of the zipper startled Blizzard more, and he charged for the open door, knocking her aside. The guard's legs dropped to the ground as Sara was struck, and then Blizzard plowed up the aisle. In seconds, he was gone. "Get him!" Sara shouted. Megan jumped to her feet and stumbled over the specter after she headed out of the cage. She wondered why Sara wasn't following, and then realized she still needed to lock up the guard. Megan heard a door bang open just before she turned into a new direction. 30 feet away, Blizzard had charged out into the night, alone and afraid, and full of dangerous power. Chapter 33. The Monitors, the Mirage. Frank Redford stepped out the front door of the security building, jumped down the steps 2 at a time, then hurried across the sidewalk. In the 15 years that he'd been a security guard at the Waterford Zoo, he'd never experienced a single break-in. Until now. Seconds ago, he'd seen someone standing near camera 14. A girl with tall, bushy hair. In the grainy, black and white monitor, she looked strange. Ghostly somehow. Frank stripped the baton off his hip and moved into the area that the camera 14 monitored. The girl wasn't there. He turned left, right. Was it possible that he'd imagined her in the video? She'd seemed so ghostly. Could he say for certain that she'd actually been there? Maybe a spot had appeared on the screen, some type of interference or something. It sometimes happened with the old cameras. Maybe his tired eyes had imagined a person. He looked all around a final time, then holstered his baton. 15 years with no break-ins? Why was he being so jumpy? As he turned back to his spot, his security cap suddenly slipped off the back of his head. He spun around and saw it lying on the sidewalk, a dark oval among the shadows. What in the world? He looked around again. The only movement was the soft sway of tree branches. There was no one, especially no ghostly girl. He swept up the cap by its brim and put it in its proper place. As he turned to go, his cap tipped forward, slipped across his face, and tumbled down his chest before landing flat on the ground. He pulled his baton and spun around again, fully expecting to see the girl with the big hair. He turned left, right, left again. The baton trembled in his hand. Grumbling, he scooped up his hat and pulled it so far down on his head that his ears curled outward. He headed back to the security building. A bit quickly, he realized. When he got to the door, he tried to turn the knob. It wouldn't budge. Locked. When he reached for the keychain on his hip, the familiar clink and rattle didn't come. Frank Redford's keys were gone. He cocked his baton again. No one was around. When he tried to ask, "Who's there?" the words wouldn't come because his breath was stuck in his throat. He plucked his wallet from his jacket and opened it. Inside one of the leather pockets was an emergency key for the shack. All the guards carried one. Frank quickly pulled it out, jabbed it into the slot, and pushed his way inside, locking the deadbolt behind him. Grateful that this lock only opened from the inside. Footsteps pounded up the outside stairs, and then the door handle shook in his hand. Someone was out there. As Frank rushed over to get a walkie-talkie, his gaze happened upon the rows of monitors on the wall, and he saw something in the camera 19 that made him halt. A polar bear was charging across the open zoo yard, and in camera 25, a rhino was out of its exhibit. Frank flung open a steel cabinet and snatched a walkie-talkie off a shelf. He held it to his face and pressed a button. "Adam? It's Frank." He waited, the walkie-talkie trembling in his hand. "Adam? Come in?" No answer. Something was wrong. "Troy?" he said. "Pete? You there?" "I can't." His voice trailed off as he noticed the polar bear running past the zoo carousel. A staticky voice came to the speaker. "Come back." Frank realized that the room was spinning, and he forced air in and out of his lungs. "Guys, we got..." He could hardly bring himself to say the words. "2 animals loose. A rhinoceros and a polar bear." A chuckle came through the speaker. "No elephants? You sure camera 12 is clear?" "Guys, I'm not joking. This is real." When the airwaves stayed quiet, Frank realized he was believed. "I'm near the rhino exhibit," Pete said. "I can be there in 5 minutes." "Copy that," Frank said. "Troy, where is it now? The bear, I mean." "Near the carousel. I'm not picking him up on the camera right now." "I'm on my way." Frank nodded, forgetting that no one could see him. "Frank," Troy said, "are these the animals the Clarksville Zoo brought us?" "I don't know," Frank said, worried about the same thing. They could be." A pause, and then Troy's voice again, more serious than ever. "Frank, you better call the cops." "Roger, I'll do that right now." As he set down his walkie-talkie, he did a double take at the monitor for camera 25. Someone was in the rhino exhibit. A kid with a red winter hat. As Frank reached for the phone to dial 911, something crawled onto his desk. Some type of lizard. A chameleon. It was followed by another and another until dozens appeared. Frank cursed under his breath. As he took a step back, he felt something pulling on his pants, and he looked down to see countless chameleons crawling up his legs. He screamed and swatted at them again and again. On the ground around him were hundreds of chameleons. Frank glanced toward the main door and realized they were coming through a mail slot. He felt a tug on his jacket. The chameleons were past his waist now. He swatted a few away, but there were too many. They crawled into his chest and over his shoulders, their claws pricking his bare neck. He looked down again and screamed at what he saw. The chameleons were gone, and so was his body. Frank ran then. It was all he could think to do. He grabbed the door, pulled and stepped onto the porch, which, like his body, was no longer there, even though he could feel it beneath him. Nothing made sense anymore, and Frank continued to run. After a few seconds, his foot slipped on an icy patch and he fell. As he struggled to get up, he noticed his body was visible again, but now it was covered in long hair, like an animal's. To his left, an administrative building was bathed in the light from a tall lamppost. Frank ran to one of its windows and stared into it, barely able to believe what he saw. The skin around his eyes and nose and mouth was black and leathery. He had deep, upturned nostrils and thin lips, and the rest of his head was covered in thick black hair. Frank looked like an ape. The world began to spin. Frank went hot and then cold. He stopped moving and then collapsed onto his back. The starry sky began to narrow and narrow, and beneath the sudden hum in his ears, he was able to make out two voices. "At least we got this one," one said. "Does it matter?" the other asked. "The damage is done." The hum stopped, the starry sky disappeared, and Frank momentarily left the world, glad for it. And I'll stop the video there, ending chapter 33. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys soon when we continue our read-along of the Secret Zoo Raids and Rescues as we get towards the more concluding parts of the story. But there's still a lot to unpack here, so there's a lot going on all at the same time. But I hope you guys are enjoying the read, and I hope to see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching, and please take good care of yourselves and be safe. Bye.